You're listening to the Southern Gospel News Podcast, the most listened to gospel music podcast in the world, with your hosts, Darren Sutherland, Southern Gospel Hall of Famer Arthur Rice, and I'm Daniel Britt from Homecoming Radio. Now, sit back and relax as you listen to SGNP. Welcome to the Southern Gospel News Podcast. Hi there, I'm Daniel Britt with Darren Sutherland and Arthur Rice, SGMA Hall of Fame president. By the way, we've got a big show today. We've been excited about this guest and welcoming him on, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Guys, it's good to can I say this? I know we're a podcast, but for those watching by way of television, it's good to see you all in the same screen this time.
You know, I'm not on the road this week. Arthur's not in meetings this week. And Daniel, you're just always in the studio, man.
I'm just old faithful in this place, yeah.
Does Gaither have you chained to that studio, man? Is he that hard to work for? He told me one time he was a perfectionist.
You know,
how much time you spend in that studio?
I remember when he told you that. And you know what? I think we produce about 11 homecoming radio shows every week. And so it's a lot, but no, I get it. I was out at a swim meet last night for about 6 hours, believe it or not, standing poolside. I think I saw more of that pool than I ever wanted to see, but you know.
Arthur,
are you in the office?
What's that?
Arthur's in the office, it looks like.
Yeah. He was actually at a pool last week too. Me and him was texting back and forth, Arthur, when you did that Southern Gospel Hall of Fame show on YouTube. TV, you were actually at a pool that night. So.
That's true. Yeah.
Did you ever get a hold of Jason Clark, by the way? Arthur?
No.
No. Well, maybe I'll do a shout out because I know him. And
yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, good.
Yes, I take it back. Sorry.
Good.
Yes, I forgot what I said.
Are you getting that old?
Yeah.
Are you getting like Ray Dean? Or are you getting old, Arthur? Is that what it is?
I kind of sent a secret message to him to make sure that Kelly was watching.
There you go.
I didn't want her to miss.
Right.
Well, you know, when that show was on, you know, I'm real good friends with Todd, and I called Todd and I said, "Hey, man, are you watching?" And he says, "Watching what?" And I said, "Don't tell me." And I said, "Is Kelly going to get in tonight? Because this is before y'all announced." Mm-hmm. And folks, Arthur did not tell Daniel and I who was getting in the Hall of Fame.
We didn't tell anybody.
Didn't tell anybody. So I said to Todd, I said, "Are you watching the Hall of Fame show?" And he says, "Yeah." I said, "Well, good. That means Kelly's getting in." Because I knew Todd wouldn't be watching unless Kelly was getting in. So, you know, I can give Todd a hard time like that. He's my buddy. Man, Daniel, I'm excited today for the guest we have coming on. Because I'm going to say this before we ever introduce him. Okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Had not the Lord had other plans, and had we placed secular plans in place, this trio of family members, without a doubt, would be the pinnacle of gospel music in 2024 with their unique style, voices, songs, stage presence.
Oh, yeah.
And I will say this in a positive manner. They have a sister with a freakish voice that you can compare to Whitney Houston, David Phelps, Elton John. That is just, for lack of a better word, sinister good, okay? It is just remarkable what their sister can do. And we'll get into that talking to Tim Greene, how it was to have a little sister that could out-sing everybody in the house. But yet she had a brother that you could tell was an edifier in Tim and a builder-up of people, and another brother in the late Tony who was probably one of the greatest promoters that this business has ever seen at a young age. And there's a lot to talk about. Yeah. Tim Greene with the Greenes is going to be with us in just a second. Daniel, what's your best memory of the Greenes? I mean, you were young when the Greenes were at their pinnacle.
Yeah, and I remember getting a hold of a project by the Greens and just thinking, my goodness, I need more of this. And so then I started collecting more of their albums, and with some personnel changes along the way, but they were all good. I thought this is one of those groups that is, what do we call, that has an alumni, if you want to say, the people who pass through that. So you've got the core family, those that carry the name, obviously, but
Right.
then you had those that came through that left certainly a mark and went on to do great things. I have to say, I come from my mother's side of the family. They're Greens, but they don't have the E on the end of their name, so there is a difference. But I don't know that this world is big enough for two Everett Greens. But there's there's two Everett Greens in my family, and so how cool is that? And so we're going to dive into some of that too, not only with the name, but the music. Obviously, the music will go down in history as some of the best family harmony.
Arthur, with the Kingsmen, when you first heard the folks up the road in Boone, North Carolina, and you were down there in Asheville with the Kingsmen, or when did you first hear the Greens? Were your family group then? Had you already joined the Kingsmen? Were you with Squire? Do you recall when you first heard these kids?
No, I was with the Kingsmen when we first when I first heard them, and of course Everett was there, and Tim and Tony. Of course, they were all young, and Kim, and I guess you guys had really just kind of started coming on. About that time, it would have been 84. So I think you guys were just kind of just really kind of catching on, and people were really starting to grow that fan base.
Well, Daniel, let's go ahead and take a break, play a Green song, bring Tim on the show,
Yeah.
and let him answer all these wonderful questions we're throwing out there today. Is that cool?
Well, yeah, it's a little bit unfair. He's in the green room just ready to jump in here because I can tell he's got some things he wants to say. So we're going to come back with Tim Greene in just a moment. It's our guest today on the Southern Gospel News Podcast. I always like to remind you to make sure, no matter where you're listening right now, that you take a moment, check out the Facebook page, like it, see what's happening there, and go deep into the archives of all the great guests we've had at southerngospelnewspodcast.com. Straight ahead, Tim Greene on SGNP. Don't miss it.
A lot of people say that the blood's a controversial issue, but you see, there's life in the blood, and I want to sing about it tonight. When Jesus Christ was crucified, he was placed in a tomb, but on the third day he arose, and I believe that he went before the Father, and he took that blood and he said, Lord, this is for everyone that believes upon me. The sacrifice has been made. And I'm thankful now that when I knelt at the feet of Jesus, that very same blood fell upon me. Sin is a captive, it binds and it holds. Satan will try to abolish your soul. There's only one hope for your destiny, and that one hope is found when you're down on your knees.
Southern Gospel News Podcast back here. Daniel Britt with Arthur Rice and Darren Sutherland. And we are so thrilled to have this guest on today, Darren. Tell me, you asked the questions earlier to me and to Arthur about our earliest memory. What about you?
I was at, Tim will remember this. He won't remember me, but he'll remember the church, I'm sure. I went to church in Marietta, Georgia at Central Baptist Church. A guy named Tony Peace, who later was with Palmetto State and some other groups. I mean, one of the best local choir directors. I still tell Tony to this day he was a better choir director than he was a quartet man. Okay. And Tony brought the Greenes in, and man, here's this big chunky guy like me, Tony. I mean, getting up there tearing the house down. Here's a good-looking young man that all the girls just loved, named Tim. And here's this beautiful girl that basically sung notes that nobody else had ever sung before. Okay?
Yeah.
And she was hitting heights. And I saw them at Central in Marietta. And then they were, I think, at the Cobb County Civic Center later on with the Inspirations Homecoming or something. And Morning View Baptist Church. They got pretty big around the northwest Cobb County area, and I would go see them, and I just thought, man, and then all of a sudden I hear the girls marrying Dean Hopper, and I'm saying, somebody just stole their money. Somebody just stole their money. But I mean, anyway, that Tim, I'm being honest, my friend. Thank you for joining us. Daniel asked me, so I had to tell the truth.
Yeah.
Tim Greene.
Hey, guys. Hope you're doing okay today.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Wonderful.
What are you doing nowadays, Tim? I mean, you singing much? I know you preach, but what are you doing?
Yeah, I'm pastoring a little church in Ruffin, North Carolina right now called Victory Church. And we have a praise team that does a lot of the Greene songs.
Mm-hmm.
And we've actually been going out doing some different services at different churches around North Carolina, doing Saturday nights and Sunday nights and that kind of thing. So I'm scratching the itch a little bit, continuing to sing some, but still writing songs and working in my recording studio at home and just enjoying life right now. It's a good time of life.
That's good.
That it is. What started the Greenes? I know your dad loved gospel music, was a piano player. What got you kids started? And I say kids, we're all grown adults past 50 years old now, except Daniel. But when we first saw you, Arthur and I, you guys were probably, you were in your early 20s, I'm sure, if not in your late teens the first time I saw you. Arthur, how old were they first time you probably saw the Greenes, you think?
Early 20s, I guess. I think Tim and I are close to the same age. And so it was 84, I guess, the first time I'd seen him, heard him. And of course, Tony was, 12, 13, going on 45.
That's right.
That's a good way to put that.
We started in 1979, and it just really started with Kim. She would go around the house singing all the time, and Dad was singing with a local quartet, and he just thought one day, hey, this girl can sing. So he started putting us up beside him on the piano stool and started playing some songs, and we started singing along, and Tony and I started hunting some harmony parts, and before too long, we were asked to sing at some local churches, and it seemed that people really enjoyed it. So we started into the studio and did our first little record, and Charlie Burke of the Singing Emergence was a good friend of my dad, and he heard that record that we did, and it had Jeff Gibson's song Gloryland on it. And he told us that we ought to send out a single to radio with it. He thought it was strong enough to do that. And we didn't even know what a single was. We didn't have a clue what he was talking about. So he helped us out, and we produced a little single and sent it out, and it made the top 40 chart. And because of that, got asked to sing in Oklahoma with the cathedrals one night, and that opened up some doors for us. And it just started going from there,
Yeah. Cool.
Hey, let me ask, because you mentioned Kim, and Darren alluded to Kim, and so I was good. You kind of answered my question a little bit there, that you were hearing her sing around the house, because sometimes talent isn't instantly known, as far as maybe they're timid, or maybe it's something that's honed a little bit. So it sounds like she was singing maybe from childhood, right? But
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
and I know this music is very fond to look back at the old singing school days. Did you guys have any kind of training like that, or was it mainly just in the church world combined with this natural singing around the house kind of talent?
Well, we sang a lot with our church choir, and Kim was featured at a very early age with the church choir. She was probably 5 or 6 years old when she started doing that. And we had a choir director that was very helpful in helping us with harmony parts and trying to figure out how to sing songs, and which way to do them, the arrangements and that kind of thing, that we didn't know what we were doing. And they were a huge help at the local church.
Yeah.
But yeah, we knew at an early age that Kim really had something special, and we wanted people to hear it for the glory of the Lord.
Okay, so pause tape. There's a PSA. If we could insert a public service announcement right there for the local church, and bringing up, even just the training part, okay,
Right,
of
right.
church music and kids. Darren, you know what I'm talking about.
Well,
Okay.
Arthur's a minister of music like me, and
Yeah.
the fact is, it's not taught in school anymore. There was
No.
once a time when all four of us would go to elementary school, and we may be singing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star," but we would all learn parts singing
Mhm.
"Twinkle
Right,
Twinkle Little
right.
Star" in the third
Sure.
grade.
Yeah.
Yet now, even when we had Mac Powell a third day on, and this is a guy that's won Grammy Award after Grammy Award. You ask him, you say, "Mac, where'd you learn to sing?" And he said, "Church choir in Coleman, Alabama, when I was coming along." And this is a guy
Yeah.
that wrote more praise songs than anybody in America.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And that's where he learned it.
Yeah,
So
no doubt.
it's good stuff. Daniel alluded to it. We don't want to make this the Kim show. We've already patted her on the back enough, Tim. And she'll
Okay.
appreciate that when you share this with her. And hopefully we can get her to be a guest on here one day. But Tim's an excellent writer, okay?
Yeah,
Tim, when did you find that you had that gift, and when did you really start penning songs for your group and others?
Well, I had a song on our very first album called Jesus Saves. And it was just a real simple thing with the acoustic guitar. And after that, I really just had an interest. I didn't think I would be any good at it, but I had a big interest in it. And I just started trying to develop it from there. But when I really got into it a lot was when I met Phil Cross. Phil and I became friends right around the time that we recorded Miracle in Me, which was right about the time I met Arthur, I think, in around
Mhm.
84 or so.
Mhm.
And we met at Phil's church where he was the choir director. And we went over some of his new songs on the piano, and we went over a couple of my new songs. And Phil and I just formed a relationship where we kind of enhanced each other's writing, I think, and tried to encourage each other as we would
Wow.
write. And we wrote some songs together, and we just had a great time. But yeah, probably around 84, 85 is when I really got serious about writing.
Cool.
That's awesome.
With that, go ahead, Arthur. I'm sorry.
No, I was just that's and that song was one of the ones that really put you guys on the map. Really, when
That was our first, what I call big song,
Yeah.
that really hit the top of the charts and got people calling on the phone for us to come sing, and just opened up a lot of doors for us. It's amazing what one song can do.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah, no doubt. Arthur, let me ask you this before we move over and talk
Mhm.
about something else with Tim. What was the reaction from other quartets and personnel to the Greenes when they first heard them? I know you guys as quartet men stand off to the side. You're at the record tables. You're seeing these new kids come up. They're young. Anytime you see somebody young, even in today's world with people that are young, you take special note of who they are.
Mhm.
What was the reaction you can remember when you've got this girl singing Miracle in Me and these two guys next to her harmonizing extremely well? And just putting it all together. What was the reaction? Do you recall?
Well, of course, then, at that time, it was exciting because you had all these new groups coming on. Not only the Greens, you had the Martins were the same way. They're just kids. Kind of came. In fact, I think one of the first times we worked with you guys, Tim, and the Martins was up in was it up in Virginia or somewhere? It was an outside thing, and I think it was one of the first times the Martins had ever sang out. I mean, it was, they're just teenagers,
Yeah, it
and
might have been Watermelon Park.
I believe it was Watermelon Park, exactly.
Yeah.
And that it was exciting to see them, and especially when they had such great songs, because it was a kind of a it was it was a time when our music was really growing. It was expanding quickly. Not only it was a day before really tracks came along, so you kind of had you had musicians, you had the bands. It was a kind of a different time, and you could see all the talent, and it wasn't just vocal driven. I mean, you had, musicians and young musicians, and a lot of times that's kind of where a lot of the musicians kind of got their start moving up to, to some of the bigger groups, was kind of coming from these family groups and coming out of these churches and that sort of thing, which you don't have anymore. It's like, it's like me. I've been looking for, a couple of musicians, and they're just not available. I mean, they're just not, but, when I was a kid, you could shake a tree and you'd have 5 bass players fall out of it. And,
Oh yeah.
you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
they could play, and, not only play bass guitar, they could play guitar, they could play piano, they could play, they were just so talented. And now you can't, you just can't find anything. I mean,
Right.
it really is sad. It really is sad.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Tim, tell us, we're going to fast forward. We could sit and break down the Greens for 2 hours and not get the whole story told. But a lot of people don't know your testimony and what happened to you physically and what you went through. And friend, for lack of a better word, we almost lost you. If could you tell that story to our listeners? Because a lot of Southern gospel fans don't know that story. They just
a partial
know
story. Yeah.
Right.
They just know that Tony passed away, Kim went to the Hoppers, and Tim went to preach somewhere. That's what I hear when I ask about the Greens.
Right.
But more than that really happened in your life. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Well, I could take all day to tell you some of the things that happened, but try to make it as short as possible here. In 1999, we were having our homecoming singing in Boone, which was a yearly thing that we did outside, and it was always a pinnacle weekend for us. And the following week, when that was over, I started getting these terrible headaches, and couldn't figure out what was going on. They just got worse and worse, and I kept going to doctor after doctor trying to figure out what was going on. And finally, I got to the place where I could hardly get out of bed. And a friend of mine in Atlanta had told me about a doctor there that might be able to help me. He thought maybe it was an environmental issue. So my family loaded me up and took me to this doctor in Atlanta, and he was the first doctor to actually run a scope up my nose and into my sinus. And he just backed up against the wall and he said, "Man, you're full of mold." And we had no clue that mold could even be a problem, could even make you sick. But by the time they found it, it was already in my sinus, it was in my lungs, it was in my bloodstream, therefore it was in my brain. And that was starting to cause me to shake profusely on the right side of my body. And within another 3 months, I was in a wheelchair and couldn't walk. And so they sent me to a clinic in Texas, an environmental health clinic, and I was there in and out for about 2.5 years or so, and had several doctors there in Texas tell me and my family that there was nothing else they could do, that nature was going to take its course and I wouldn't be here any longer. But I'm glad Dr. Jesus had other plans in mind and
Yes,
brought me
sir.
through it. But I was sick for 9 long years. And after those 9 years, I was driving my car one day out to the pier at the beach. I was living down at the coast. The doctors thought I could breathe better down there. And so I thought, while I'm here, I'm going to write some songs. So I went down to the beach with my guitar and my Bible and some paper and a pen and thought I'd write some songs that day. And while I was down there looking at the ocean, the Holy Spirit just kept telling me to turn my Bible to 2 Kings chapter 5. And I couldn't even remember what 2 Kings 5 was, but I turned it over and started reading it. It was a story of Naaman, the leper, how he went into the water and washed 7 times and was made whole. And after I read that scripture, the Lord just really spoke to my heart so clearly and said, I'm going to send a preacher to baptize you in this Atlantic Ocean you're looking at 7 times like Naaman. And you're going to be whole. You're going to be well once he does that. And I thought, Lord, that's wonderful, but there ain't nobody going to believe this one, you know. And sure enough, I'd tell people and they'd look at me like I was crazy. But I thought God would send that preacher, you know, in a week or two. Well, a month passed, no preacher called, no preacher came by. 3 months passed, 6 months passed, and my health started getting worse again and back in a wheelchair. But one day when I was driving my car up to Wilmington, North Carolina, after we had lost our house and our cars and everything because of the sickness and the expense of the sickness, um, I thought I saw a preacher's face in the windshield when I was driving. I know that sounds really strange because it's strange to me to even think about it. But the preacher was Larry Walker. He's a preacher from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I had known him for years, but I hadn't seen him in about 7 years, hadn't talked to him. And I thought, well, why has the Lord reminded me of Larry? And so I just pulled the car off beside the road and I started praying for Brother Larry. Thought maybe that's what the Lord wanted me to do. And so I turned around and went back home. And when I walked in the house, immediately the phone started ringing. And I went over and picked up the phone, and guess who's on the phone? It's that preacher, Brother Larry Walker. And I said, Brother Larry, this is awesome. I can't believe this. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, I just saw your face in my windshield about 25 minutes ago. He said, that's crazy. He said, I'm driving in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I just saw your face in my windshield. He said, I just had to call you because I've got a question for you, and you're going to think it's strange, but I'm going to ask you anyway. And I said, what's the question? He said, I feel in my heart I'm supposed to come baptize you in the ocean 7 times like Naaman. And he said, would you allow me to do that? And I said, how quick can you get here? And he said, I'll see you Sunday morning. So the following Sunday morning, he and his wife showed up and we went to church together that morning. And while we were in church, the devil started on me like he always does, tell me that everything that I was doing was crazy and that nobody was going to believe it and it wasn't going to do any good. You know how the devil will try to discourage you. But the preacher got up and he said, folks, your pastor's not here today. He's sick. And I don't know what he was going to preach on, but he said, the Lord gave me this sermon last night so strong. I know it's for somebody in this room. He said, open up your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 5. I want to read you the story of Naaman. And right there immediately, I knew that God had ordained what we were doing and we were doing the right thing. And I looked over at my wife in church and she had both hands up in the air and tears pouring down her face. And needless to say, when church was over, we went straight to the beach for baptism. And when he put me in the water the first time in, I thought I was going to freeze to death. They said the Atlantic Ocean was 53 degrees that day. It felt like 35, but it was really cold. But about the fourth time when he dipped me in the water, it started feeling like bath water. And the seventh time when he baptized me, I was hot all over. And I came up out of the water and I shouted, "Hallelujah, praise the Lord." And when I did, there was a little Spanish lady standing there about 5 feet tall, and she stuck her finger out and pushed it in my chest. And she said, "Tim Greene, receive your healing." I'd never seen her before in my life and haven't seen her
Wow.
since. But, you know, ever since that moment, I've been fine. The Lord just took away all the mold from my body, and I've just been a new person ever since. And I just thank the Lord that I'm able to keep writing and singing some on the side, singing in my studio, and just trying to continue to work for the Lord.
Wow. What a great testimony.
And
That's awesome. I love it when God does stuff that can't be explained.
That's right.
Uh,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's brought me through
Tim,
so much.
Tim, let me say this. And Arthur, we've done 180 interviews, you know, but it's stories like that right there is why we do these interviews.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we cut up a lot, we make jokes, we talk about funny things that have happened on buses with groups and why people write songs and silly things different artists have done. But it's stories like this right here that keep me coming back in this studio and sitting down and feed me for the next day to see how a man that some people, and you know how this works. There's people out there that deify you gospel singers. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They put you guys up on pedestals that you don't deserve, and it's unfair to you. But then we see things that you go through, that they go through. I never will forget. And Tim, I honestly believe we'll hear another story about this. And Arthur, you'll remember this. Squire was on with us one time, and Squire got to giving his testimony and talking about something. And it wasn't a month later that Arthur and I got some emails from a guy that said, "Hey, man, I was driving a truck, and I heard Squire's story, and the Lord spoke to me." And that's what's great about these podcast things. You know, they'll last forever. In 20 years, somebody's going to hear this story, and this story's still going to be a bomb, a coolant to somebody's life. And thank you for sharing that and just being blunt and transparent. I mean, I'm a P1 gospel fan. Daniel's with Homecoming Radio. Arthur's the president of the SGMA. Guys, have y'all ever heard that story before and those details?
No.
We need more stories like that in gospel music.
Yeah.
We need more victory like that.
Yeah.
Because what we're doing is lifting up the best music, but lifting up the King of Kings.
Yeah.
So, man, I just can't go on long enough pouring it out and telling you about it. And I need to just hush because y'all know me. I could talk all day. Daniel, what you got? Come on.
Oh, well, you know, I have to say probably one of the, this is long before I ever moved to North Carolina. I was traveling through, and I must have been in the Greensboro area, and I remember being at a gas station, and I was filling up with gas, and I was messing with my radio. And on the radio, I'd found Joy FM, and the Greenes were in the studio with Wanda Taylor and Rodney Bauckham, and you guys were just telling stories. But it was done in such a way that I thought this was nowhere on my radar that I'd ever be in North Carolina working, much less at that radio station. But I thought, now that's the way to bring the humanness of the singers into everyday rush hour.
Right.
Just telling these kind of stories. I mean, of course, with Tony, they were funny stories too, but stories that could change a life. And of course, once I then, as the Lord would have it, make the way, and I came to North Carolina and was at that station, Wanda was telling me stories about Tim and stories about Tony. And of course, up and down the road and the highways of North Carolina, you had those two common denominators, the Greenes and the Joy FM radio station. So,
right.
That's good, Tim.
That's good stuff.
If I had to identify, you correct me if I'm wrong. You've got the skill of songwriting. Of course, we know Kim's got that vocal talent that's just, once in a generation. And then Tony had this MC work that will be, unmatched to this day. That right there, if you want to call that a triple threat or whatever, I mean, you guys had the corners, the three cornerstones of a I guess you'd call it a three-legged stool. What you guys brought to the platform, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think that was part of the success?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it really worked. I think Tony had a huge part in the group's success just because he had that gift of being able to communicate with people that Kim and I didn't have. Tony knew how to get down where the rubber meets the road with people, and he knew how to convey what was on his heart and at the same time do it with humor. And
yeah.
people loved it. A lot of times people came to hear the Greens just to hear what Tony was going to say next,
Oh
so
yeah,
it made a big difference.
yeah. So building on that comment that Daniel just made. Okay, so you're mid to late 80s, and here you are. You've got this incredible group that's coming on that people are loving. You got hit after hit, and then all of a sudden Kim is marrying Dean Hopper and she's leaving. What's going through your mind at that point? What and my question to that, I've got an answer to that. So, but what is going through you
Well,
guys' mind at that
first,
point?
the first thing that went through our mind was we're finished.
Yeah,
We can't go on another mile without Kim because she's such an important part. But as we prayed about it and thought about exiting gospel music and the ministry, Tony and I just came to the decision that God wasn't finished with us yet, and that there was somebody out there to help us continue on doing what we were supposed to do. And thank God, Kim had heard Amy Lambert sing somewhere, and she told Tony and I one day, she said, "You ought to call her and have her come try out because she thinks that she's going to be something special." And sure enough, the first time we heard the first few lines come out of her mouth, we knew that she was green material, and
yeah,
she could carry the mail pretty good. We were
yeah.
excited to have her.
Well, the reason for my question on that was that that you guys introduced so many incredible female singers, some of the best sopranos that ever came through gospel music. You
Yeah.
guys gave them their first start and first steps to get going, and that in itself is something that God had to do, because that's exactly what you said is exactly how we feel when something like that comes along. Is you go, well, throw up your hands, it's over. Let's go back to the house. It was fun while
Yeah,
it lasted,
yeah,
and this is it. Um, but that's awesome. That's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Kim was really impactful in helping us find Amy Lambert, and then she helped us find Melina Parks. And then she also helped us find Taranda.
Yeah,
Taranda was singing at a fair in Florida where the Hoppers were singing, and she heard Taranda in a competition of some type at a fair.
Miranda
And
Kaiser, right?
Taranda Kaiser, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And so thank the Lord Kim didn't totally forget about us. She helped us find some ladies that could sing and continue on the ministry. And we were
Okay.
very blessed to find some good ones.
Tim, I'm gonna ask you a question nobody's ever asked you. Okay. They may have. So I dealt with Tony in the business side and the advertise, and I used to tell him all the time, I said, dude, you need to quit this Gupton Jones funeral director mess. You need to be an you need to be an advertising guy like me. Okay. You could do this. You're a better pitch man than you are an undertaker. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
When Kim came to you guys and said, I'm getting married, I'm going to join my husband's group, did Tony ever try to sell her and say, no, Dean needs to join the Greens and come with us?
Oh, absolutely.
Be honest.
Tony
Now, this
was
is the only
very
time you've
vocal
ever been
about
asked
that,
this.
and
Was
I've
Dean
never been asked
ever?
that question before. But
Yeah.
oh yeah, we thought, hey, Dean needs to come play the bass for the Greens, or play drums because he could do either one
Yeah.
of those
Was that
very
ever
well.
considered?
Yeah, it was talked about, but in the end, we knew that biblically the woman's supposed to follow the husband, so we went ahead and caved because we knew it was the right thing. But there, right there at the beginning, there were some discussions about it for sure.
Arthur, can you not, in your mind, Daniel, in your mind, because Daniel, you interviewed Tony a number of times. I'll tell you my funny story about interviewing Tony the first time we met. But could you not hear Tony building a sales pitch in his mind to
yes.
Kim that no, Dean needs to come with us? Because at that time, the Hoppers were a different style of group than what they are right now.
I was just fixing to say that at the time that happened, they were really a family group, but it was all built around Connie. And it was a completely different sound. They really didn't have that big soprano. It was built around the men mainly, and the guys. And then when Dean came on, that gave them a little bit extra on the guy side, a little bit younger sound. But it was really built around Connie. And then when Kim came, it really catapulted them into a different arena than they were. And I don't say that to take anything away from the version of the Hoppers pre-Kim. They did a great job at what they were capable of doing. When Kim came along, it really boosted them into a different era, and they really at that point became really who they are today.
Right.
It's a different style.
Completely. Absolutely. Completely.
Just a different style. So I can hear Tony with that argument. I can hear it.
Yeah.
I can hear it.
Yeah.
Hey,
Tim, we've talked a lot about Kim. We've talked about you. We ain't talked much about your baby brother.
Yeah. He was something.
Yeah.
Where would he be in this industry today had the Lord allowed him to stick around? He's in a better place. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
But where would we be seeing what do you envision Tony doing with gospel music today?
Well, he would still be singing. There's no doubt about that. He loved singing for the Lord more than anything in the world. He loved the funeral home business, and that was always secondary. But he had a love for that, and I'm sure he would still have the funeral home that he put together in Charlotte just 2 years before he passed away. So I'm sure he'd still have that on the side, and I'm positive he'd still be promoting concerts all over the country. Tony loved staying busy, and he always was into something every day of his life, continually on the phone. I thought that phone was just part of him for a long time because he never took it off of his ear, but he was always doing something, and he would still be doing that today. He'd still be singing for the Lord and promoting gospel music any way he could. And he loved promoting the other groups as much as he loved promoting the Greenes. That was one of the greatest joys he had was trying to help other groups get out in front of the people and do what they did for the Lord,
I love Tony. There are so many stories we could tell about Tony. If I had to narrow it down to three things, I got to say, when I first took my wife, we went to New York City, and it blew my mind at the time too, because you would think, oh, who do you ask? Who do you get travel tips for New York City, for Times Square, for hotels? Well, for me, it was Tony Greene. Yeah. And I think that surprised a lot of people. But Tony knew his way around, and so he gave me hotel advice. Sure he said, get as close to Times Square as you can afford, is what he would say. The other thing was, Darren and I have shared some unique radio experiences, like doing a radio remote poolside at a swimming pool.
Yeah,
but probably as a tie, one of the most strangest things we've done, but it was glorious, was the grand opening of his funeral home. We did a radio remote. He had a full concert in the little chapel of that funeral home. And when we told our cohorts, hey, we got to go work a funeral home live remote grand opening, they thought, who comes to a grand opening of a funeral? But it was packed, and there was legends in the room. You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
and then great. The last thing I'll say is when we were getting word that Tony was in his final moments. In fact, I think it was Dean. Dean called the radio station and said, and in fact, announced it. Said Tony's gone. I said, wow. Okay, can we go on the air? And he said, yeah. So we went on the air and we announced it. And then about 5 minutes later, he called and said, well, Tony's back. I said,
Yeah. Yeah.
Run that by me again. What do you mean he's back? We've already announced that he's passed. Well, he's sitting up singing. And so we went back on the radio and we said, well, we didn't know if we got the news wrong or what, but Tony's still living, at this moment. And he's surrounded by family and friends and he's singing. And then when he did pass, we had to make a second announcement that he had passed again. And that brings me to the third point. The third point, which is kind of long here, but his funeral was something else. We broadcasted that funeral live. That's the only time I've ever put a funeral live on the radio.
Yeah, right.
And I remember like it was last night, just before the funeral started, I was in the men's restroom and I believe it was Michael Booth of the Booth Brothers walked in. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was Michael. May have been one of the Triumphant guys, maybe both. He pulled me aside. I was washing my hands. He said, What is your opinion? We're supposed to sing Elvira in this independent Baptist church live on the radio funeral. And I said, whoever is Michael, I said, well, my opinion is you can't argue with the dead man. If that's his wishes, I think you go with it.
Yeah, that was Tony's request that be sang at his funeral. And I thought it was great that they went ahead and went with it, but that was Tony. I was thinking about him a minute ago. We were in Arkansas before there was cell phones, and we were singing somewhere out there on I-40 somewhere. And we got to Little Rock at the truck stop in the middle of the night one night, and we got some fuel, and the driver assumed we were all in the bunk asleep. Well, after he gets the fuel, he heads on down the road. We get about 100 miles down the road, and we get pulled over by a highway patrolman. And the highway patrolman comes up to the front of the bus, and he goes, "Sir, are y'all missing anybody?" And he said, "Well, I don't think so, but let me go check." And he went and checked, and sure enough, Tony wasn't in his bunk. So he came back and tells the highway patrolman, he said, "Yeah, we're missing somebody." He goes, "Well, his name's Tony Greene, right?" He said, "Yeah, it's Tony Greene." He said, "Well, he's waiting for you back at the truck stop." So we turned around and went all the way back. And I don't think Tony had ever been that mad at me in his entire life, because when I got there, he was standing in the middle of that truck stop with his pajamas pulled all the way up to his chest and an old T-shirt on, and had on some Bullwinkle bedroom shoes. Right in the middle of the truck stop. Uh-huh. And you can imagine how he felt being left like that in the situation he was in. So he didn't like me very much for a couple of days after that one, but that was always one of my favorite memories of Tony.
That's hilarious.
Arthur, you're a quartet man. I know you got a Tony story you can share with us, or maybe not. What do you got?
Oh gosh, there's so many, because we worked with you guys a lot there for several years. I don't know. It's hard to narrow it down. He was just a funny guy.
Yeah, he really was.
Couple more questions, Tim, and we'll let you get out of here. And I got to tell you my funny Tony story first. I was doing a show in Atlanta when Daniel and I were working together for Salem, and the Big Fish was our, contemporary station next to us, 104.7. And I had went to Jubilee out at Floyd Road Baptist Church, where Taranda's grandmother was a member in Austell, Georgia.
Okay.
And they Tony and him had been singing there on Monday night, and I met with Tony and I said, "Hey, can you drop by the studio tomorrow in Buckhead at 1:00 and come on the show?" And he said, "Yeah." So here I'm announcing it. Or I said 2:00, I forget. So the whole 1:00 hour. "Hey, Tony Greene's going to be with us next hour. We're going to take live requests. Da 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 da." Daniel, you may remember this or may not remember this. 1:00, we start announcing it. 1:30 comes, we're building it up, playing Green songs the whole way through. 2:00, Tony's supposed to be there. He's not there. So I start doing a countdown live. "Well, folks, Tony Greene told me he was coming in, but Tony's not here. I wonder where he's at."
Yeah.
10 after 2, he's still not here. This is honest to goodness truth, Tim. 2:30, here he comes running in with wet hair and a pair of flip-flops on. Taranda's grandmother called him and said, these people are going to crucify you if you don't get up there to that radio station. And he came in wet hair and all, but
That's
hey,
great.
it was fun. I'm going to ask you a funny question. Did you beat him up a lot when you were growing up? And I'm going to tell you why I'm asking that in just a second. Did you make him cry?
I don't ever remember beating him up, but I do remember we had been singing about 6 months with our first bus that we had, a little MC5 bus. And Tony was the worst driver in the world. I mean, he could hardly keep the bus in the middle of the road. And I had just gone to him and I said, I'm going to be changing my clothes in the back of the bus here in just a few minutes. And I want you to try to drive smoothly, drive slowly, because I don't want to fall and get hurt back there. And I said, please be careful. Okay, no problem. Well, I get back there and start changing my clothes. And sure enough, he's all over the road, driving at about 20 miles over the speed limit. And I fell over and hit my head. And I went running up to the front of the bus. And of course, he's talking on the phone. And I grabbed the shoe that I had and I threw it at him, not wanting to hit him, but I hit the windshield and broke the windshield out of the bus.
Oh, no.
So that's brothers for you. That's the real stuff
Yeah.
right there.
Oh,
That's
wow.
what happens in real life. But we loved each
funny.
other tremendously. But we had our moments, that's for sure.
You know, when we do shows like this today, Arthur, it reminds me of how faithful God is. It reminds me of how, I mean, Tim, we almost lost Tim.
Yeah.
We lost Tony.
Yeah.
You know, they're ace in the hole. Their sister left to go to another group. But God was faithful, and he sent them all on a different path. And I look at the world today, and the Lord knew back in 1984 that Tim was going to be pastoring this church in North Carolina, and those people in that church was going to need Tim as a shepherd to lead this flock based on circumstances that he went through. And it just amazes me. I said it at the outside, at the beginning of the show, had the Greenes stayed together, I feel like they would have been as pop. I believe they would have sung on every Gaither show that there was in America.
Yeah.
Okay. I think they would have been as popular as the Cathedrals of the Collinsworth family now had they kept coming out with songs like Miracle in Me and Number One Love and things of that and songs like that. But God's got different plans, man. And Tim, thank you for sharing his plans with all of us today.
Yeah. Somebody's
going to get something out of this. We may never see them till we get to the other side. But, man, it's been a blessing that you were able to come on with us today and tell us all this fun stuff.
Man, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to see you guys again. And it's
You
brought
too,
back
pal.
some good memories getting to see you.
Yeah.
Good.
Very
If
good.
somebody wants to hear Tim Greene and the Greenes music now in their church, give them a website or something to go plug into, Tim. You know how to do a record pitch. You know, you were raised doing record pitches, man. Okay?
Well,
You did them more subtly than your brother. Your brother would stand there, I got 5 for $10 just tonight
Let
at
me-
this
let me-
special.
Hang on. Let me
Go
ask,
ahead.
Let me
That's
ask one
right.
question. Let me ask one question before we get going, because this is goes right along with that. You know, NQC. You know, nobody does a record pitch. Nobody
right.
in the world does a record pitch except for Tony Greene. How much flack
Tony,
did
that's
you
right.
catch off of selling those Afghans?
Hey, Tony could get by with anything. You know
Oh
that.
my!
And
I never will forget that. We're all standing around with our jaws on the ground. We couldn't believe he had the guts to do that. Stand up there and sell those Afghans.
that's right.
Oh,
Tony could get by with about anything. That's
man.
for sure. He had that personality.
he really did.
He told me one time, Tim, how close was this to happening? Gaither comes out with the video, okay? And it's all anybody's talking about was the first and second homecoming video, okay? Tony looks at me and says, you know what we're going to do, Darren? I said, what's that, man? And I was running the radio station there in Atlanta. He said, we're coming down there I've been in touch with Charles Stanley's people, and we're going to get a whole group of us and come down there to In Touch Studios, and we're going to create our own little reunion video down there. And I said, man, that's a great idea, because there's some folks that Gaither hadn't included yet.
Yeah.
But shortly after that, y'all did the Gaither fun stuff and all that. But anyway,
Yeah.
fun stuff.
Yeah, we had some great times, that's for sure.
Fun stuff. Tim, how do they get a hold of you? If you what's your website? If they want to hear you preach, they want to hear you sing, how do they do all that? Tell the fans
It's
how to do
best
that.
just to go to victorychurch.org, victorychurch.org. Phone number's 910-380-1148. And, of course, all the Greene's music's available on iTunes and Apple Music and all those platforms. So we appreciate everybody continuing to listen to the Greenes. I see a report each week from iTunes, and there's still a few people out there listening to what the Lord gave us over the years, and I appreciate that so much.
Man, we could go another hour, and this has been good. This has been good. We're going to close with your favorite Greene song, Tim. If you had to pick one, what song would it be?
It would probably be There's a Miracle in Me, just because it's a song that relates to anyone that's ever met the Lord. And it's a song that really catapulted the Greene's ministry into the next level, and it's a song that touches people's hearts. So let's go with that one. There's a Miracle in Me.
We just did it in our
Arthur,
choir
what's
just a
wrong?
few weeks ago. So,
There you
great
go.
song.
Arthur, what's wrong with living right anyway?
Hey, not one thing.
You've been listening to the Southern Gospel News Podcast. For Arthur Rice and Darren Sutherland, I'm Daniel Britt, and our thanks again today to Tim Greene for being part of this show, and we'll see you next time.
Oh, miracle has caught my eyes, to cause my heart to see. But by faith I now can realize there's a miracle in you. And I've never seen the thousands fail, or the blinded to see. I have never watched him raise the dead, but I know when he lifted me, there's a wonder right before my eyes close enough to see. In my heart is where